week's edition of Elections Weekly. We got 4 hosts with you this week because Kraz Greinetz is joining us again. You may see him more in the future on other episodes, but he's joining us this week. We're going to be recapping the Tuesday primaries that we covered, the Nebraska primary and West Virginia primary, both of which had interesting election results. We're also going to be talking about some of the upcoming primaries on Tuesday, some of the biggest ones of the year, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Oregon, Idaho, a bunch of other stuff. And then Kraz has some information about like the partisan makeup of primaries. We might go into some other stuff as well. I know there's been some candidate announcements lately, but we got a good show for you coming up, basically. So going to go ahead and start here. Throw it to Joe here. We'll talk about the primaries first. So on Tuesday, we had the big primary in Nebraska, where Jim Pillen was nominated for governor on the Republican side. He won a plurality of the vote. The Trump-endorsed candidate, Charles Herbster, finished in second. And then third place was Brent Lindstrom, who's a state senator, a moderate state senator from the Omaha area. On the West Virginia primary, we had Alex Mooney handily defeating David McKinley in his primary, defeating him by around a 20-point margin. Mooney had, of course, been endorsed by President Trump, and McKinley had voted for the infrastructure bill and for the January 6th commission, among other things. So give us a little more detail about these races, what went on, what we saw, and what this kind of means going forward. We're going to go throw it to the rest of the panel as well.
Yeah, I'll start with West Virginia because that's the easiest one. Incumbent versus incumbent race, as West Virginia lost a seat in reapportionment this year. So that means obviously Alex Mooney and David McKinley of the old 1st and 2nd district were drawn together. McKinley, in what ended up being his dooming vote, voted for BIF, which is the infrastructure bill. Mooney did not. That means that Mooney got the Trump endorsement, which really turned out to be the key deal breaker here. Not only did Mooney dominate in the counties that were part of his old district, he also won narrowly in a lot of the counties that were in McKinley's old district. He did pretty well in a couple of them. He didn't win them by a whole lot. It was usually 4 or 5 points, but in a race like this, with how he was dominating in that little panhandle close to Michigan and not Michigan, Maryland and Virginia. In that area there, a lot of Republicans, some of the higher populated counties in the district. Mooney ran up the score there. Really just kind of an end for McKinley. He arguably did make some poor moves. I think the Manchin move, looking back on it for a Republican primary, probably not the smart decision in the world. Didn't seem interested in really trying to defend his vote, really just time to say, you know what, I did it, but this is what I've done previously for West Virginia. It didn't seem like he was always fully in. Mooney really capitalized on that, used the Trump endorsement to his advantage, and really took McKinley to task, obviously, as we've seen by the final data point. Nebraska was much more interesting. Nebraska, in the end, Jim Pillen, the former University of Nebraska regent, a businessman, he's endorsed by outgoing Governor Pete Ricketts. He was able to pull out about a 3.5-point win over Charles Herbster. Brett Lidstrom, who early in the night looked pretty good because of the early results out of some of the key large counties, Lancaster County, where Lincoln is located, and Douglas, where Omaha is, as well as Sarpy. He was doing really well in those high populous counties. The election day vote really shrunk his margin, though. He did really badly in a lot of the exurban middle areas and rural western areas of Nebraska. Pillen did really well in the middle part of Nebraska and finished in second in a lot of the western part where Herbster was doing better. He actually came really close. Herbster won a good portion of those counties, but he didn't win them all by a large margin, most of them. There were only a few where he won by more than 10 points. Really in the end, that's really came down to it there. Pillen across the line. That is Trump's first endorsement loss of the year as well, which was kind of the big story there to other pundits. In competitive primaries, obviously, he's endorsed in a lot of races where people have not had opponents. But in competitive primaries, I forget whether or not he endorsed in Texas, but at least since the start of the month, that puts Trump at, I believe, 5-1 in terms of competitive primaries. He went undefeated in Ohio in competitive primaries there. J.D. Vance, Madison Gilbert, and Max Miller in those competitive primaries. And then obviously he won Alex Mooney. So it's 4-1. He won 4-1 in competitive primaries. Obviously, he won Mooney over McKinley. He lost Herbster. You can give him a half a point either way. If you argue he kind of pseudo-endorsed against Don Bacon without really endorsing against Don Bacon in that race. Bacon won by pretty tremendous numbers in that race as well. Even kind of shocking, I think, to even some of us on the night. But really, that's what happened in Nebraska. A win for the establishment in Nebraska, a win for kind of the more outsidery branch in West Virginia in terms of where the Republican Party is going.
Yeah, I think it's kind of amazing that Herbster got as close as he did. He only lost out by 3.5 points, with 8 credible sexual assault or harassment allegations against him. Mm-hmm. I think it's pretty safe to say that without those allegations, he'd have won pretty handily, given he got as close as he did with them. I'm not surprised by the Mooney result. But I'm not as convinced that the Manchin move was a terrible one. Manchin has a 60% approval rating with Republicans. It's not like they were voting for Manchin; they were still voting for a Republican. So I don't think it had. I don't think it was a terrible decision. I mean, when you're a losing campaign, every decision you make, looking back, looks like the wrong one. But I don't think that was ill-advised.
Yeah, I think really, I'll let Kraz go into this real quick, but for me, I think the 2 big votes that hurt him were not only Biff, but the January 6th commission. It's that 1-2 there. The Biff vote is what really seemed to get President Trump involved and the former President Trump involved in the race. Apparently, he was very, very angry by that vote.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to jump in and say that, in these kind of multi-way primaries, the Trump endorsement has worked to get his candidates up to about 30% of the vote. But, Herbster got 30, Vance only got 30. It just so happens they were in such divided primaries. I think that kind of fits with the idea that the Trump endorsement for a candidate is very helpful. It gets their name out there. It's a plus, but you need to be running an actual campaign to capitalize on it. Like, you can't just be like, Vance was running like a whole campaign, like a very public and like well-funded campaign. But even before he got the Trump endorsement, Herbster had like a real campaign. So like, and then, the thing of like, and I think this is shown too by like what happened with Don Bacon, right? Trump comes out, he kind of does like the anti-endorsement of Don Bacon, doesn't endorse his opponent, but, like kind of talks crap about Don Bacon. And then like Don Bacon wins with 75% of the vote. So like, I think there is like something to like, you need to be running your own legitimate campaign, and then maybe that endorsement will get you some level of publicity, but you gotta get the rest of the way yourself.
Yeah, I mean, Trump didn't even know who Don Bacon's opponent was. His comment was literally, "Steve, I don't know who you are, but good luck." I mean, that's not exactly a ringing endorsement for a campaign that's running on "We're the Trump campaign."
Like, ideally, you want it to be, you want it to be a sound quote. You want it to be like, you want to have the visible, "Don't vote for Don Bacon, vote for me." You can't run Jeff something. Good luck. No. That's not a campaign ad. That
doesn't work like that.
No, if he had just left the "I don't know who you are" out, if he had just said, "Steve, go get him," okay, that's something. It's not perfect, but it's something.
It's better than nothing.
I actually think an interesting result in Nebraska was a Secretary of State primary. Apparently what had happened was, and I'm not like hip to Nebraska politics, so anybody can jump in with this, but apparently what had happened was Secretary of State, Bob Enevan, he had apparently pushed back on some statements that there was fraud, or that in 2020 election specifically, there was fraud, or there was voting machines changing votes. And apparently this angered enough people. He got 2 opponents who vowed to crack down on the voter fraud. He won by a wide margin. He did get under 50%, but he won by a wide margin. I think
because there were 2 of them.
Yeah, there were 2 of them. I think he wins a one-on-one race because he was close enough at 50%. But it is interesting. It's both interesting that his challengers were able to get that much traction off of the whole voter fraud thing in a state that Trump won by 20%. And also that, but even in a very conservative state like Nebraska, right, it wasn't enough to get them all the way, right? Like, he still was able to win by a wide margin because, like, fundamentally that just wasn't going to be enough on its own.
I do want to show the map here of that primary. I've got it here from the Times, because I do think it is interesting, because it kind of goes against maybe the general thoughts here. If you can see here, where these two do the best is actually in and around some of the middle counties out here in Nebraska. They actually, partially because of splitting, but also because, you look in, Scotts Bluff, Banner, Kimball, he gets close to a majority or over a majority of the vote in some of these very rural western counties. This is not really where you would think, these are kind of the counties where it would, overwhelmingly dominate, but really instead it was kind of out here in these middle Nebraska counties where it really worked against him. And then he completely tore the doors off Lincoln. Lancaster area was the big one. He won over 55% of the vote there and won over 8,000 votes.
So I have a theory here. I have a crackpot theory here, which is if you look back at Ben Sass's election, you see a very similar pattern, except in that one, it's like kind of a straight line, whereas if you basically go through the river, I assume it's a river that's a geographic boundary, you kind of look at like where it stretches the county, stretch along, and then go right along the side. The ones that were south of that line, Sass was winning 90 to 100% of the vote in those counties. The ones above it, he was doing at best, closer to that margin, but at worst was getting, losing those counties. The counties he did the absolute worst in were those ones that went to other candidates. My theory, though, is that some of those specific counties are so divorced from metropolitan areas and news networks that if you're running ads in those areas, you're not going to be doing that. It's kind of like in North Carolina. We saw this in 2014 or 2018 when we had two referendums on the ballot that were changing the Board of Elections statewide and then changing the way judges were appointed. Both of those went down resoundingly, horrifically bad margins it was like 75 to 25. The only counties that the vote went through were the far west of the state, the most divorced from mainstream North Carolina metro, and then the far east of the state up towards the Virginia border. Those are the only areas, aside from maybe Robeson County, where you saw these referendums win. It's because they're so divorced from the Charlotte, Raleigh, Winston, Fayetteville metros. That's my theory for Nebraska. Those ones in the center, they're a lot closer to Omaha. They're a lot closer to Lincoln. They're ones that you can get within feasible range. But it might just be those ones that are they're just so far out of the way that it's just harder to run in them in general. It's a big state. These are big areas. Are you really going to go to, Scotts Bluff to campaign if you're the Secretary of State? Probably not. That would just be my theory. I could be completely off base. I could be wrong, but that's what it screams to me is that they just didn't put any effort into running in those areas, or there weren't ads going up in those areas.
That wouldn't surprise me. I mean, I don't know. I don't know the geography well enough. That wouldn't surprise me. I do think, to Kraz's point, that it is funny that two people running on voter fraud in Nebraska can get 57% of the vote combined. It smacks to me of the Sharia law bans in states like Oklahoma, where there's maybe two Muslims. So
to be fair here, and I don't want to be fair to the conspiracy theory people, I want to be fair in terms of Omaha congressional district did go for Joe Biden. That is what they're saying, is that the rest of Nebraska's vote is fine. It's Omaha that was Democratic voter fraud. That's where it's all. That's where those arguments are all going for.
So the Secretary of State targeted a city.
That's pretty much it.
That's pretty weak sauce. That's pretty weak sauce, guys. 57%.
It's pretty bad. It's pretty, and I don't want to say to be fair to them, but that's the reason. That's their stated reason is the votes in Omaha were not legitimate, and Trump actually won Omaha.
Yeah, that's why Brad Lindstrom won, right?
He lost by 10 points. I will add.
That's why Brett Lindstrom won those counties too in the Republican.
And that's why Don Bacon won re-election.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's why Don Bacon is no longer in the House. All that voter fraud.
Yeah,
it's why Pennsylvania was able to win two down ballot races.
Yeah, it's why Ben Sass won Omaha.
Bad fraud.
It's all the voter fraud for Ben Sass and
Omaha. And Philadelphia, too. In Philadelphia, even though it went for 3 points more than Trump, they did a really good job of the voter fraud there, apparently. Yeah, even though it won towards Trump by 3 points.
They did such a good job with the voter fraud that they also made it slightly more Republican to fool people.
Yep.
And they're clever.
It's sneaky.
Democrats are known for being clever and maneuvering things really well.
That's the other than aside from political messaging, that's the one thing Democrats are most known for.
Yeah, we're really good strategists. We manage campaigns super well.
But yeah, we'll go ahead and move on from Nebraska and Ohio. So we got several ones going up. I'm going to let Joe talk about Pennsylvania and Idaho, but Kraz and I real quick are going to talk about North Carolina's primary. So statewide, we have 2 primaries statewide that are worth watching. There's some court races which are interesting for North Carolinians, not for anyone else. On the Republican side, we expect Ted Budd to be the nominee. McCrory's support has kind of imploded since Ted Budd started campaigning about 4 months ago. Before then, Budd was routinely leading in the polls, and then after Ted Budd started campaigning, he started to do better than McCrory. Again, proof that the Trump endorsement, which was in the middle of the year, is not the be-all, end-all. You actually have to campaign. On the Democratic side, Sherry Beasley has basically no opposition after Jeff Jackson dropped out to run for the state house, for House of Representatives in the Charlotte seat for a 1-year rented term. So those are the 2 ones we're watching. We don't know how well Beasley will do. Last time, obviously, there was a divide between black areas and whiter areas with Cunningham and Erica Smith. We don't expect that this time. Beasley is black. She'll probably do well all over the state. The 2 primaries we're watching most importantly, though, are North Carolina 11 and North Carolina 4. So I'll start with North Carolina 11 here. Madison Cawthorn, you know him. You like him or you hate him. If you're watching the show, I'm probably going to guess you're not the biggest Madison Cawthorn fan just based on demographics, but he has been in a lot of hot water lately for a number of scandals. I could go an entire episode explaining all of them, but I won't. There's insider trading allegations. There's improper payments allegations. There's obviously the sexual assault allegations or sexual harassment and stuff from the time in college. There's the most recent one, which is some really bizarre and inexplicable behavior with his cousin.
Wait, did I miss sexual harassment allegations recently?
That came up recently again. It was the Patrick Henry College stuff.
Oh okay. Yeah,
it's a rerun.
Yeah. Okay, that's all real.
The rehab. Yeah. Okay, I'm sorry. I thought there were new allegations.
No, there's the stuff with his cousin.
Has a new schedule every 2 days.
And on top of that, there's also the existing scandal of him having decided to move to Charlotte to run for a district there. And then when it was redrawn, deciding to go back to the 11th district, all the while closing all of his offices in Western North Carolina outside of Hendersonville, which in a rural district like North Carolina 11 is a really, really bad idea. It's real. People need those services. It's something that they genuinely have to go to the representatives for. So he's facing a crowded primary field. I believe there's 8 total people in the primary, including him. The top 2 Republican opponents for him are Chuck Edwards, who's a state senator, and Michelle Woodhouse, who is the wife of Dallas Woodhouse, the venerable Republican, I guess, I don't know, guru, whatever you want to call him, brother of Brad Woodhouse, the equally prominent Democratic person in North Carolina. Both of them are hoping to hold Cawthorn under 30% and then get through the primary, although it's entirely possible that, that Cawthorn gets more than 30% and one of them gets it. I would expect Edwards to be doing better. Frankly, Edwards is the incumbent state senator for much of this district, areas that Cawthorn has legitimately ignored as he's pursued a comms only strategy as a representative, which, to be fair, that's not a bad idea right now. If you're facing all these scandals, to have only comms people on staff instead of, other people. But we'll be watching this one because we're trying to basically see if he gets that 30% threshold to avoid a runoff, or if someone gets higher than him, he gets the 30%, but someone gets higher than him and wins. All those are possible. He could also win. What I will say is that the 11th district has the highest rate of turnout among any voter so far, among any of the districts, congressional districts in the state. It is far and above anything else in terms of interest right now among voters, which could spell good or bad for Cawthorn, depending on how you're looking at it.
Yeah, despite all the scandals, I have my own opinions. I think Cawthorn is favored still. He is the incumbent. He has an all-coms staff. I mean, he's going to do well. The
problem is he's out of money.
Does he have the Trump endorsement?
Yes.
Okay, the Trump endorsement, his name being constantly in the news. I know he's got a bunch of scandals on him. I still think he's going to crack 30%, and I think he's going to win this.
Yeah, but what state senate district is Edwards, Eric?
the 50th, I believe.
So that's
Like,
going to be
this is the large chunk of counties that are like 90% Republican.
right. So that he's far western. So he's
Mhm.
yeah. Okay. So I mean, like the thing is there, right? Is that like that makes up about 1/4 of the district's voters and probably closer to 40% of the Republican primary voters in the district, right? He's their state senator because 1/4 of the district is Asheville, which is going to have way less than 1/4 of the Republican primary voters.
Yes.
And so I'm kind of with you, Eric. I forget what the specific rule for North Carolina is. Does the state have runoffs? It does, right?
It does, but only if no candidate gets 30% of the vote. If someone gets 30%, it doesn't go to runoff.
Okay, so only if Kennedy. Okay, so I mean, I just think Cawthorn's going to have kind of a tough time with Edwards as well as in his state senate district. That's going to be like 40% of the vote, and if Edwards is doing well there, like, I mean, I don't think the Asheville voters like him very much. So
it's worth noting. It's worth noting. Asheville is Buncombe County. A plurality of voters in Buncombe County are unaffiliated voters who can choose which primary to vote in. And there has been, not only has there been statewide, most unaffiliated voters are going Republican by about a 2-to-1 margin. This is a big area with a lot of unaffiliated voters who would normally be unable to. I'm not talking just Asheville. Henderson County, I believe, has a plurality of unaffiliated voters. This is a big voting demographic here to keep an eye on. This is a factor you wouldn't have to be dealing with in like the 5th district or the 10th district.
No, I'm sorry. I just looked up Chuck Edwards. He's in the 48th.
Oh, 48th? Let me.
Yeah,
they may have renumbered.
I don't know.
Let me see exactly which one.
How's he doing on money? Because that's going to be the big thing.
So he represents Henderson, Transylvania, and then part of Buncombe. But
okay, so that's even worse for Cawthorn because Henderson is actually a Republican area.
Henderson's big. I mean, if I'm thinking about the I mean, those are big Republican areas. I mean,
that would actually make the 50th district the wild card. That sort of area is how those areas. Those are disconnected from media. Like I said, those are disconnected from media markets in general.
Right.
A lot of them, some of them are actually tied with the Georgia, Atlanta media market in particular. Like some of those counties are counties that don't even get Panthers games; they get Falcons games. Gives you an idea of like how disconnected they are from the rest of the state. It's from a media perspective.
Mm-hmm.
I would tend to agree that I would be surprised. I would think Cawthorn is favored until I see otherwise. But if there's a way you can lose this race, it would be what has happened. He's specifically, most of the leaks have not come from establishment Republicans. They've come from campaign insiders, people who were formerly big Cawthorn supporters and are no longer supporting Cawthorn. These sort of people have sway in sort of these rural areas. But we'll be keeping an eye on it. We'll watch it. It'll be one of the big ones we're focusing on election night. Not to stick on it too long, because there's another equally interesting primary in the 4th district, which is this new, or similarly existing to the old 4th district, this Chapel Hill, Durham, Alamance, Burlington, Chatham County, that sort of part of the state.
So that's I guess it's technically my home district. I mean, I do go to Duke, so I don't want to lay claim to living in North Carolina for real, but it is going to be an interesting race. So we've got Valerie Foushee is the Foushee is the establishment candidate here. She's lost some support over the last few weeks. She's taken a ton of APAC money, which she was criticized for, but I think more importantly, it's that the APAC money has been virtually all of her fundraising. She doesn't really seem to be doing very much fundraising otherwise. She doesn't seem to have a lot of grassroots support outside of that. I think that's raised some alarm bells for various supporters and various interest groups. So she's lost some support. She's still the establishment choice, though. She's running, her main opposition looks to be Nita Alam, who is she's a Durham County Commissioner. She's running as a progressive. So I think Alam she has the benefit of being from Durham County, right? Because she's running as a progressive. She's probably going to do well in Chapel Hill, Carborough, all those areas, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then now that she's a county commissioner in Durham, she can probably do well in Durham as well, where I think normally you would expect the progressive candidate to not do as well. So I'm actually interested in this race. I don't think it's going to go to a runoff because they're really the only two serious candidates. You have Clay Aiken, formerly of American Idol fame, running as a Democrat in the primary there. But he hasn't really gotten a lot of traction. I think he'll probably get like 9-10%. I don't think he's going to be a major factor. And then outside of that, I don't think there's any really major candidates, although Eric can correct me if I'm forgetting someone, but
there's not.
No,
there's not. So I think it's probably going to be, you're probably going to see the winner win with something like 43-45%, clear it, not have to go to a runoff. I don't know who's favored at this point. I would say it's probably a toss-up.
So just to put into perspective, Kraz said that most of the fundraising came from AIPAC. Most might be understating it. In the last quarter, only 7 donors were from the district.
Oh,
Yeah.
So look, she raised a lot of money from AIPAC. She got like $400,000 bundled from AIPAC. They've spent over $1 million in outside funding, boosting her along with other PACs. So she's definitely got the money on her side, but Alam hasn't been slacking on fundraising. She's put up quite a good number.
Yeah, the big contrast here. I'm sorry.
I was saying the race has been kind of strange, right? I mean, you've got.
Yeah.
I haven't seen a ton about it, and I've been living in Durham County for the last year. I haven't seen a huge thing about it. David Price is retiring. Like, Alam has been out there, selling herself as a progressive, but I haven't seen a ton of as much energy as I expected around her. I don't think. Like, maybe I'm just looking in the wrong places, but I haven't seen like a huge amount of energy around her, despite her being a Durham County commissioner.
I think there's a reason for that.
Well, I just think the key is going to be Durham, right? Because I think Alam's going to do well in Chapel Hill, Carborough. Then you have, Burlington areas in the district, some rural areas that I think are probably a little bit more favorable to Fushi. But that being said, though, like then you've got Durham, which is like basically, half the district or close to half the district. So I think that's going to be the key there. I just think it's kind of a weird election because, like Fushi only has 7 in district donations. She's not getting any money, but I haven't seen a lot of hype about the race in general. Like I just haven't seen that much about it.
Yeah.
No, honestly, look, my bias is clear. I support Alam, but I tend to err on the side of the person with the most money is going to win 9 times out of 10 in a primary like this. So I would say Fushi is ever so slightly favored, but I don't think it's a done deal. There was one poll of the race from a Fushi internal that had her up 17 points, which strikes me as unlikely to say the least. 17 points just feels like too large a margin, even. It's an internal, so I'm sure it is hyping her up a bit. But
I think it kind of depends. Like my look on this in particular is that Fushi, most of her money is coming from AIPAC, right? But the big thing is that she has a lot of these establishment Democratic support that really doesn't matter in Durham, Chapel Hill. This is where a lot of establishment Democrats come from. They come from Chapel Hill or they come from Duke.
She has started losing some of that, though.
Yeah. She has the AFL-CIO endorsement, which is, as far as there's not a lot of unions in North Carolina, having AFL-CIO on your side in Durham, though, is not bad. I think the big reason you're not seeing a lot about Alam is, frankly, she's in a weird situation because she's a one-term county commissioner in Durham. And as a county commissioner, she's faced some controversy. The big controversy was with the Black community voting with 2 white members of the council to remove the county's Black county manager, who was accused of being too fiscally conservative. This raised a major, major stink among this establishment in Durham. There's been a ton of articles on this contrast between white progressives in Durham and then Black voters in Durham County. And they're on 2 completely different wavelengths as the direction of the county. The Black voters many of them are generational, have been there for decades, if not longer. Were there when segregation was a thing, have been there and have watched as the rest of Durham has become, thanks to Duke University, a lot more prosperous, more affluent, while their communities have either been sliced up or kind of left behind. So there's this sort of contrast between they feel left behind, whereas the progressive members of the council genuinely think that they're anti-racist. They're pursuing this broad agenda that will favor, everyone. But there's this little bit of there. So I don't know how much Durham will be interesting. I think you will actually see racialized voting patterns in this, which is pretty unusual for a Democratic primary. At least in the sense that we saw this in Cleveland, right, where a lot of the wider affluent areas went towards Nina Turner, while black areas went for
Chantel Brown.
Yeah, Chantel Brown. The difference, of course, there is that both candidates were black. Here, Valerie Fouché is black. Nida Alam is Arab, Palestinian, Muslim, not Palestinian, but is Arab. I think it's going to be really interesting because, like Kraz said, I would expect Alam to do very, very, very well in Chapel Hill and in Carrboro, which is the most liberal, the single most liberal area in the state. I would expect her to do well around Duke University, where she, I believe, graduated from, or went to college at Chapel Hill, basically around the university area. I expect her to do.
Yeah, but everyone's on everyone's off campus, right? Like, I mean, in Duke at least, right? All the kids are off campus, so
yeah,
it's like his summer break started. Finals ended for undergrads on May 1st, and for grad students like me, they ended on April 29th. So all the students are off campus, which I think hurts her marginally, probably not even that marginally, because when you look at the Duke University precinct, so on-campus housing plus the immediate off-campus apartments, they're probably casting like 5,000-6,000 votes in a presidential election, and maybe you're looking at like 2 or like 1,500 in a primary. And if like a big chunk of those people are like now gone and aren't voting, like I think that is like not insignificant.
And they were the low frequency voters anyway.
Yeah. So basically, I would expect. If you're watching an election night, look at the split between Chapel Hill, the university parts of Durham, everywhere else in Durham, and then the rural areas in Burlington, which is going to be a genuine swing area. Not only do those areas have a lot of people who are still registered as Democrats and can vote in Democratic primaries, they're also not as ideologically liberal. Most of these are Republican, with the exception of Chatham, which is very odd because it is a mix of really Republican rural areas and then diverse rural areas, and then these super affluent, super liberal postgraduate suburbs south of Chapel Hill and Durham. Basically, those would be the ones to watch. I don't want to take too long, though. We want to go to Joe here to kind of talk about Pennsylvania, the other areas as well.
Yeah, so Pennsylvania's stupid. It has gone from bad to worse. But, apparently, as in breaking news today, we may be getting a Trump endorsement in the governor's race today or tomorrow.
Oh,
which would throw a whole nother spear into things.
Doug.
Because the thing is, Doug Mastriano is bad. Let me repeat that. I know some conservatives online question my credibility, but no, let me tell you straight up, Doug Mastriano, bad. He will lose. He will lose probably by 5 to 10 points. It will be bad. You will not get what you want, and we will get worse as a state, in my opinion. Kathy Barnett is rising. She is bad. Bad tweets. Bigly voter fraud person. Bad.
Also, maybe have lied about her resume a little bit.
And probably lied about her resume.
I think it's somewhat telling that I haven't seen any oppo dumps about these people in the primary, which makes me think that there's a large amount of oppo about to drop the second they win the primary.
Oh, yeah.
Win the primary.
And Joe, I don't know if you saw this, but Rick Scott apparently says he's okay with Kathy Barnett.
No, stupid. Stupid. No. Don't just look at, diversity, shiny new thing. No. Bad idea. Look at the tweets. Look at the past. This is a bad. She is not ready for prime time. Very bad. Vote for McCormick or Oz. I don't care who you vote for out of the two anymore. Just vote for one of them. Don't vote for the other lady.
To be fair, Trump has spoken out against Kathy Barnett on Truth Social, I guess, and on this.
He does it.
It looked like Facebook, honestly. When I saw it, I thought it was Facebook.
I was confused. I thought he was back on Facebook too.
Truth Social
anyway,
is awful.
That's my personal rant. The Senate primary is still very open at this point. The last Trafalgar poll had all candidates within about 2.5 points of each other, with still a relatively high amount of undecided voters. This is a place where, this could be a place where geography could actually come to effect. We have to remember McCormick has all the, basically the whole western side of the county to him. We've talked about it many times on this website before, on this podcast before. Pennsylvania geographic voting, very big, very huge. McCormick only won from the western side of the state. Everyone else from the south central or eastern side of the state. That usually leads up good things for McCormick. It's not as prevalent as it has been in Democratic primaries, but it's certainly still been prevalent. This is a place where McCormick, if those undecideds are, this is the issue of Trafalgar. They don't give us crosstabs. They don't give us locations. So we don't know. But that's the one where I'm thinking more chaos right now. Obviously, the governor's race, Mastriano, currently the favorite, sadly. If Trump endorses against him, that throws that whole race into absolute chaos. If he endorses him, Mastriano is going to be the nominee. There's no question. Very bad thing. Very negative outcome type thing. Well, again, very bad. Mastriano, very bad. Very much stupid. Very much one of not like a guy who just playing it up for a primary. No. The guy who accepted an award from two very strong QAnon people who played a video that said 9/11 was a false flag operation. It's bad. Bad. Not good. Don't do it. Be very stupid if you're from Pennsylvania listening to the stream and you're a Republican if you vote for Doug Mastriano. That would be unquestionably the dumbest thing you would do, and I would lose respect for you as a person. In fact, I would lose respect for you as an individual.
But Joe, Josh Shapiro is saying that Doug Mastriano is a big Trump supporter. And if you support him,
so we're just going to Todd Aiken this bitch. Okay. That's fantastic.
Okay.
That's never like I get liberals like, well, what about they did this for Trump? No. This is totally different. Remember, this was totally different because we're not running against Hillary Clinton. We are running against a relatively well-versed man from Montgomery County. Mm-hmm. That's a problem. Damn it. This is not the same. They're trying to Todd Aiken this bitch. Don't fall for it. You're okay. It is stupid.
I just want to say, I've seen a lot of crazy Republicans run for office. Doug Mastriano literally wants to make everyone re-register to vote and supports a 3-week abortion ban. That's
not going to be a bureaucratic mess at all. Re-registering. That won't end up being a. That could.
I don't know. I can't tell whether I think
older voters who would have to try and re-register in Pennsylvania. That would totally not backfire at all.
I can't tell if I think Mastriano is underrated or overrated. I mean, I think part of it is that he's done well in the polls, so I'm tempted to say that people are underrating him because they just don't think he can win the primary. But at the same time, like the geographic voting is super strong, right, in Pennsylvania, and he's from Franklin County, which that's not just that is literally the middle of South Central, like middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania, on the Pennsylvania Turnpike, like nowhere. Like it's not even like a rural county right outside of Allegheny or something like that. Like it's really, really rural, middle of nowhere. And so my feeling is in the gubernatorial primary, right? You've got, Dave White, who's from, I believe he's from
Delaware.
Delaware. Sorry, I get him McCormick confused, but he's from Delaware County, and you also have in that gubernatorial primary
McSwain and Barletta.
Barletta, right? Barletta, who's from Luzerne, he's from Hazleton. Missouri. Yeah. So, I think that if you're just looking at geography, right, White has to have the big advantage in terms of he's from Delaware County. He's going to do great in that southeast corner of the state. And is Mastriano really going to be able to run up the numbers in Allegheny and the Allegheny suburbs?
I do want to point out that Dave White did technically get the endorsement from the Southwest Pennsylvania group of committee chairs. So
yeah, so that I don't know, right? Like, so part of I
don't know if that'll mean anything, but I just wanted to put that out there.
See,
and
I don't know. I'm
point out that I had to go visit my sister. I want to point out that yard signs don't mean anything. People can buy cheap yard signs. You could buy there's a website you could buy 500 for $50. You could buy cheap yard signs whenever you want, and you can post them anywhere. But I do want to say when I went up to visit my sister to drop off some work paperwork. She goes to college up more in the middle of the state near Snyder County. And I will say the difference between the Lou and the Mastriano signs were significantly less. I saw a good amount of Lou signs up there too, which is you get closer to the northeast part of the state there too. I want to point that out, but again, yard signs aren't votes. Yeah, let's always remember that yard signs no votes. Let's move on to Democrat. There is a cool Democratic primary to watch in the state. Not just the Senate primary. It looks pretty likely that's going to go to Fetterman, but the new Pittsburgh-based district, the 12th district. You've got a pretty typical establishment versus progressive race there. You've got Steve Irwin backed by retiring Representative Mike Doyle and a good chunk of unions going up against Summer Lee, who's the more progressive candidate backed by AOC, Bernie Sanders, the squad, the like, and also some unions. This is going to be a very interesting race here. Lee comes from the direct middle of Pittsburgh. She's African American. She'll probably do quite well in the African American areas in Pittsburgh, and she's as well as in the McKeesport, Braddock areas. Those areas, they're not very big, but their Democratic voters there are pretty strongly black. But however, Irwin does have the Doyle endorsement. He does have some strong establishment backing. There's been some questions about the actions of his campaign in some areas, but that's not a race that we should not pay attention to. It's another one kind of like the 4th district in North Carolina, very establishment versus progressive type race. Lee probably has a bit more name recognition, but I really can't say who's going to win for this race. It does kind of feel like one of those races where it could go either way. I don't believe we've had any polling in this race. At least if we have, it hasn't been.
There has been one poll.
Recently, at least, I don't think it has been. So, and there are lieutenant, and I see this in the chat. I should mention both sides seem to have competitive lieutenant governor primaries. Austin Davis from the western part of the state is endorsed by Josh Shapiro. He probably is the favorite there. But in the Republican side, I've heard Teddy Daniels is the one endorsed by Mastriano. But from a lot of people I've heard, it sounds like Clarice Schillinger, who's from the western part of the state. She's a person who got involved in the education aspect of things. Might sound like she's one of the favorites right now currently for lieutenant governor. That's really a race where we could see a lot of regional voting there potentially. If you want to see real regional voting in Pennsylvania, the lieutenant governor's race, very low voter education in that race. That's a race where we could see a lot of that regional voting coming to happen.
So as far as Pennsylvania 12, I actually think that one's a bit clearer than North Carolina's 4th, because in North Carolina's 4th, you have 2 elected representatives from the district, both competing. Steve Irwin isn't an elected official.
Well, you have to also remember, though, that there is the caveat that there is Jerry Dickinson in the race as well, trying to take who is part of that progressive. He's endorsed by people like Brand New Congress, who didn't switch the endorsement from there. Should be mentioned. That's another kind of twist in this tale, though. I forgot to mention that. There's kind of another twist in this race. Certainly.
But so the difference, I think, is I believe it's a majority black district. Is that correct?
No, not even close.
I thought it was. Okay.
Not even close. Pittsburgh's only like 25% black, buddy.
Oh, okay. I don't know anything. Okay, that point aside, Summerlee is endorsed by the mayor of Pittsburgh, Ed Gainey, a bunch of city councilmen from the area. And unlike Nita Alam, there is currently a rally going on for Summerlee. Bernie, the squad, Ed Gainey, all down campaigning for her right now. There was a recent poll from, I believe, Narl, that had Summerlee up about 30 points, 40-ish to 13 over Steve Irwin, with Dickinson barely getting, I think, 5%. Again, that's an internal, so take that with a massive grain of salt. But I do think Summerlee is favored, even though Irwin is getting massive outside funding. Much like Nita Alam, Summerlee hasn't been slacking, and the outside spending has come in quite a bit for her, where it hasn't come in for Nita Alam.
Mm-hmm. And one last thing before we move on to Kraz talk about the voting stuff he was going to mention is I just wanted to show this real quick, give you an idea of the voting situation. This is a typical Pennsylvania Auditor General primary. Every candidate here won at least every candidate on the ballot won at least 3 counties in the Auditor General primary. So yeah, that's what we're kind of looking. That's what we're looking for on these low information Lieutenant Governor primary.
Well, that might be important actually for the GOP in the Senate primary, because Carla Sands is from Cumberland County, so it's possible that she might sap up some of that South Central Pennsylvania vote, and then further allow McCormick to just be the only one that's truly dominating a region.
Yeah, I mean, it's possible.
We'll see.
Y'all got
It's all kind of up in the air.
Y'all got some weird voting patterns.
Hey. Hooray! Hooray for the balkanized Quakers! Woo! Go to Kraz. Kraz needs to do his part.
All right, so I wanted to run through little trend I was noticing that I thought some people find interesting. So primary turnout and primary partisan composition. Obviously, disclaimer, this is never dispositive. There are lots of reasons why primaries might shift in partisan composition or turnout. That being said, in midterm elections, the overall partisan composition of the electorate throughout all the states' primaries tends to be very predictive of the overall House popular vote. So the individualized states that have kind of their unique features get drowned out. This was the case in 2018. It was the case in 2014, 2010, 2004, et cetera. So what we're seeing right now is, compared to 2018, a pretty massive shift to the GOP in primary composition. So in Nebraska, for example, in 2018, the primary composition was 66-34 in favor of Republicans. And the other night, it was 74-26 in favor of Republicans. In Ohio, it went from 55-45 Republican in 2018 to 68-32 Republican last week. And in, I believe it was, if I can pull up the Indiana one, I think too, was also a really massive shift. And then in North Carolina, we're seeing some early vote numbers come in. And so early voting in North Carolina, Democrats, mail-in and in-person early voting right now, they're up by 0.7% in the total early vote. In 2018 at this time, they were up 16% in the total early vote. So we're seeing, 15, 16, 20-point shifts to Republicans. The other thing that's interesting about this too is that the turnout in these primaries is way up. So in Georgia, there's almost double the voters voting at this point now as there was in 2018. In North Carolina, we're seeing a turnout of almost 2x what we saw at this point in 2018. So we've gone from 150,000 votes at this point in 2018 to almost 300,000 now. In Ohio, the totals went from, I believe, about 1.5, 1.6 million votes in 2018 to something like 2.5 million votes last week. Same thing for Nebraska. It went from, I have the numbers right here. Nebraska went from 260-ish thousand primary votes in 2018 to last night about 350,000 primary votes. So I think it's notable because 2018 was considered to be a super high turnout midterm. And turnout is through the roof in these primaries, more so than 2018. And they are much, much, much more Republican. Mm-hmm. And, the House popular vote in 2018 was D plus 8-ish, D plus 7.5, D plus 8. This supports the idea that maybe we're looking at more like an R plus 7, R plus 8 environment with really, really high turnout.
Yeah, again, in particular, I don't want to take too much time. The North Carolina numbers are disastrous, to put it lightly. It's not just the Democrats are only up by half a percentage point in early voting. It's the independent voters are requesting Republican ballots 65-35. North Carolina is a state where basically Democrats make up a consistent 40% or so of the electorate. Republicans are able to win elections in North Carolina because they do really well with independent, unaffiliated voters. That's a really, really bad sign for Democrats, to put it lightly, because Republicans winning races, this is the sort of stuff that gets you Republicans like Ted Budd winning the state by 7 or 8. This is the stuff that makes some of those new district Democrats drew for themselves, like the 6th district or even potentially the Charlotte district, within the realm of competitiveness, which is not what you want. It would be incredibly ironic if the map ended up as a 9-5 anyway. That would just be that would be incredibly hilarious to some level. But this is how you get a Republican majority on the Supreme Court. This is very, very bad for Democrats. And on top of that, they have a candidate with Sherry Beasley who should in theory be doing really well with rural black voters. That doesn't appear to be the case because they're only winning the early vote by 1, and they should be winning it by closer to 10 in a neutral year. It's very, very bad. We'll need to see how the election day goes, but the election day totals will be catastrophic, to put it lightly.
Yeah, and then here are some Indiana numbers. So U.S. House District 1 in 2018 had 52,000 Democratic primary votes and 22,000 Republican primary votes. In 2022, so a couple weeks ago, that went to 39,000 Democratic primary votes and 31,000 Republican primary votes. House District 2, that didn't have a primary, but you get the idea, right? It's a pretty disastrous collapse across the board here for Democrats.
Yeah. So yeah, we'll probably be covering this continually. I don't know if we'll get an article about this out, but it's something you need to watch because this is pretty predictive of, especially when you compare them to other wave elections, which is what this is kind of shaping up to look like in a lot of ways. But with that, I think we're about out of time for the day. Thank you all for watching. Really appreciate your support. You can follow all of us with our names here below. We have got our Twitter handles if you're watching. If you're following on, if you're listening on podcast, you can find our podcast archived on Twitter, and you can find our names there. That's probably easier than shouting it out. We're also at elections_daily and elections-daily.com. We got election news. We got a newsletter you can sign up for where you get our articles delivered right to you, including daily news updates from Decision Desk HQ. Their updates from their team, which is really, really good. We got some really fun stuff coming. We're working on some updates in particular to the election shuffler. We're working on a pretty major update to that, which will be really cool. Where it's in the works. We're complete rework of the project. We're we'll give some teasers when it's closer to release, but we think you'll be really pleased with what this is going to be, what this is going to look like. So yeah, thank you guys again for watching. Like and subscribe wherever you're watching. We'll see you next week at the same time, same place, next episode of Election Weekly. See ya.